Today's aspiring songwriters and lovers were so dirt poor back in the day, at times they struggled to even feed themselves. In fact, between them, they couldn't even afford a bed frame, and they slept on a mattress on the floor. As it turns out, though, this would be a key memory years later for a hit song. After they had sold millions of records with one of the biggest bands of the 70s. It was penned by an enchanted songstress. Today's track, it's a bittersweet, nostalgic look back at the days before her massive rise to fame. And it begs the question, was she better off as a struggling songwriter than a global superstar? It's a rags to riches throwback track that comes with some other unexpected tie-ins as well, including the tragic death of a close friend and an ill-advised marriage to that friend's husband that happened for all the wrong reasons. This incredible story, you won't believe it. It's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember stealing the comics page from your father's newspaper when you were a young kid, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. We jump in the time machine every day. Make sure that you subscribe right now. I know you'll dig it. Check the bell so you always know when our stuff's coming out. We also have a Patreon below. You can get more content that helps us keep it a daily channel. We also have our merch. It's all about keeping the music alive. So today we're rewinding back to the early 80s to give you an in-depth look at the song that just missed the top 10 on the Hot 100, but really it should have been so much bigger. It's such a beautiful representation of this band with its intricate harmonies, its sublime guitar work, and its precise percussion. It's a hallmark of one of the greatest bands ever. It's Fleetwood Mac with the Stevie Nicks pen Gypsy, from their 1982 album, Mirage. I love this song. So, as we'll see in a few minutes, Gypsy is a bittersweet throwback track that has Nicks longing for her days as a struggling songwriter, before Fleetwood Mac and the complicated mess of becoming a global superstar. Back in those days, it was just her and Lindsey Buckingham living on minimum wage, fighting tooth and nail to make their mark in the music business. But these two were more than just aspiring musicians. They were also lovers, romantic partners, although their relationship was a volatile one, as we've heard in the past. To support them financially while Buckingham labored over his musical craft, Stevie Nicks worked a series of cleaning and waitress jobs, and they didn't pay much. They were dirt poor. The two used to sleep on a mattress without a bed frame. And often they could only afford to divvy up a slice of pizza for dinner. They'd have to split it. Those were trying times for the pair and made them who they were. Constant financial and relationship stress. At one point, probably more than once, Stevie was ready to quit music altogether and go home to her parents. But their perseverance landed them a 1973 studio album credited to the duo as Buckingham Nicks. However, it didn't do much to improve their prospects. The record was all but ignored by their label Polydor, and it received very little promotion. Subsequently, it bombed, and the two were dropped from the label shortly after. Their dreams dashed. It was back to the drawing board for these two, so Stevie and Lindsey, they continued on their previous arrangement. But then, lightning struck. Maybe once, maybe twice. Sorry, I had to. Maybe once, maybe twice. At the close of 1974, the pair were recruited into a revamped lineup of Fleetwood Mac. While looking for a recording studio, Mick Fleetwood connected with producer Keith Olsen, who played him a track from the Buckingham Nicks record, Frozen Love. Of course, Mick liked what he heard. He invited the two to join the band, forming the classic Mac lineup that also included Christine and John McVie. For Stevie and Lindsey, it was the end of one tumultuous chapter in their lives. But it was also the beginning of another. What followed for the remainder of the decade was equal measures musical brilliance and outright self-destruction. As we've heard in the past, from 75 to 79, Fleetwood Mac released 3 landmark albums. The #1 Fleetwood Mac, also known as the White Album. There was the #1 Rumors and #4 Tusk. Together, these 3 albums, they've sold in excess of 50 million copies around the world, and they've tallied 10 top 20 singles. Amazing. a lot of their relationship chaos within the band in past episodes, so I'm not going to dwell on it here. But since we're covering a Stevie Nicks track, I'll let her sum up what had happened by the time they entered into the 80s. What she would say, and I quote, "Lindsey Buckingham, he wasn't happy with me because I'd broken up with him 6 years before. I'd had an affair with Mick Fleetwood, which was a secret until Mick told Lindsey one day. Lindsey was horrified. Then Mick fell in love with my best friend, who left her husband for Mick, so I lost Mick and my best friend in one fell swoop. Everybody hated Mick because of what he'd done to me, so it was a bad situation." End of quote. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's move on to Mirage. Released on July 2nd, 1982, Mirage landed after a temporary hiatus in the Mac's career. Both Stevie and Lindsey had struck out on their own after Tusk. Each of them released solo records in '81. Buckingham's debut, Law & Order, topped out at a disappointing number 32 on the Billboard 200. Although his track Trouble broke the top 10 in the US, it went to number 9 on the Hot 100. Great song. Meanwhile, Nicks lived up to expectations. She delivered, achieving major success with her solo debut, Belladonna. A number 1 multi-platinum release. The record featured 2 top 10 singles, Stop Dragging My Heart Around and Leather and Lace, both duets, former with the great Tom Petty, and the latter with Don Henley, another great one. Stop dragging my heart around. Take from me my day. The album also featured the number 11 Edge of 17. It was clearly the solo breakthrough that Stevie had hoped for, and everybody knew would happen. Fleetwood Mac's Tusk World Tour had been lengthy. It depleted the band as a unit. It'd be over a year later before they would reconnect and get back to work on anything. But with co-producers Richard Dashut and Ken Calais at the ready, Fleetwood Mac returned to the studio to record Mirage. Now, the session spanned between November of '81 and March of '82. There were multiple locations, first at Les Chateaux in France, and later they relocated to Larrabee Sound Studios and the record plant back home in Los Angeles. Mirage would carry a lot of psychological baggage for Lindsey in particular. Even though the 1979 double LP Tusk had been commercially successful, it reached number 1 in the UK, went to number 4 here, and it went platinum. It was largely a disappointment for the band and their label, coming off of Rumors, which had sold over 10 million copies at the time. Just a massive drop-off. I mean, Rumors has sold 21 million just in the US since, 40 million globally. I mean, how does any band match that success? It's pretty tough. So for Tusk, Lindsey had contributed nearly 50% of the songwriting credits, which is a high number for a band with 3 prolific songwriters. Plus, he was also at the forefront of the record's conceptual direction, which was an intentional decision to place art over commerce. But with such a strong backlash from the label, the band, and many of the fans, there was a lot of pressure to return to form, with another Rumors-esque record. Producers Ken Calais and Richard Dashut both weighed in on Lindsey's approach to Mirage. Said Ken about it, "So I think he decided Mirage would be Rumors too. But they were already different people, so there wasn't the chemistry, and there was much more attitude and self-centeredness." And Richard Dashut called the approach to Mirage a mistake. Instead of building on Tusk, Lindsey tried to replicate Rumors. To do Rumors 2 was definitely a mistake. Anytime you do an album like Rumors, something so beloved, any attempt to emulate it or do better usually goes down in flames. Richard Dashut believed Mirage was a conscious attempt by Lindsey to recapture that spark of Rumors and a reactionary bid to regain sales, a move that he in fact called artistic death. Upon its completion, though, Mirage, it was a far cry from Tusk. Definitely, though, a much more FM-friendly record. Whether or not that's a good thing, it's up to you, I guess. But even though Mirage may not have been artistically groundbreaking as an album, it was a really solid album. I love Mirage. Spent 18 weeks in the US top 10 and ultimately claimed the number 1 on the Billboard 200. The album also reached double platinum status in America, and it went top 10 in multiple countries around the world. Now, Mirage spawned 5 singles, 3 of which reached the top 25 on the Hot 100 in a very competitive time in the 80s. Another that went top 10 in the UK. They were Hold Me, Love in Store, Oh Diane, Can't Go Back, and today's song, Gypsy. Gypsy was actually an older song. It was written by Stevie Nicks in 1979 at a time when the band was becoming very famous very fast. A circumstance that prompted Nicks to reminisce on a simpler time before stardom, before superstardom, really. Originally, she intended to use the song for her 1981 debut solo album, Belladonna, as I mentioned. However, it ultimately didn't make the cut and the demo was discarded.
You see, oh gypsy.
According to Stevie Nicks, all the characters in her songs, the Gypsies, the Sarahs, they are all her, just different sides of her. Throughout the track, she romanticizes her life as a poor waitress and as a struggling songwriter. Looking back at those years of scraping by in San Francisco, Stevie opens by name-checking the Velvet Underground, glamorous clothing boutique where Janis Joplin and Grace Slick used to shop. For the rest of the first verse, Nicks sheds some light on its meaning. In a 2009 interview, Stevie said about it, "In the old days before Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey and I had no money, so we had a king-size mattress, but we just had it on the floor. I had old vintage coverlets on it, and even though we had no money, it was still really pretty. There was just that and a lamp on the floor. That was it. There was a certain calmness about it, though."
With some lace and paper flowers.
But as nostalgic as it may be, Stevie admitted that the song isn't entirely a happy one. Gypsy was actually written about her best friend Robin Snyder, who was dying of leukemia. It was about how she wasn't going to be a part of Stevie's life anymore. Actually, the lyric, beautiful lyric, "I still see your bright eyes," that was Stevie Nicks recognizing that Robin wasn't going to make it. Said Stevie about it, "I was like the lone gypsy. This was my best friend from when I was 15 years old. And so I was a solo gypsy all of a sudden. And it was very sad for me. And that's sometimes when I write my very best songs." Robin had been on the road with Fleetwood Mac for about 5 years. She had taught Stevie how to sing and worked as her speech therapist, actually. She helped Stevie Nicks prepare for concerts. But even more importantly, Robin was the one person who knew the real Stevie Nicks, not just her famous stage persona. The two were inseparable. They had an effortless connection from the very start. When Robin was diagnosed with leukemia, she was given only a few months to live. However, she was also pregnant at the time and would be fighting not only for her own life, but for the life of her child. The baby, whose name would be Matthew, was actually born 3 months premature after an emergency C-section. Sadly, Robin died 2 days later. That was on October 5th, 1982. Robin's death overshadowed everything for Nicks, who recounted that when she got the news, she went crazy. She went insane. And being on the road, she felt like she couldn't properly mourn her friend. In the wake of Robin's death, Nicks turned for comfort to the only other person in the world that could understand the depth of her grief: Robin's widowed husband, Kim Anderson. Anderson and Nicks were the only comfort that one another had. As Nicks felt a strong responsibility to take care of Robin's child, she suggested to Kim that they should get married. So on January 29, 1983, Stevie Nicks married Kim Anderson to try and do what was right. However, the rest of the band, they were appalled. Christine McVie even refused to buy the couple a wedding present. Now, in retrospect, Nicks called the marriage a terrible, terrible mistake, saying that they didn't do it because they were in love, but because they were both grieving. Now, the marriage only lasted, I think it was 3 months. Said Stevie Nicks about it. The lines, lightning strikes, maybe once, maybe twice.
Maybe once, maybe twice. Oh.
That means one time in your life you find a very good friend, and maybe if you're incredibly lucky, you might find a second. It all comes down to you. That means you have to look very hard. Robin was the lightning in Stevie's life.
And it all comes down to you.
Now, the original version of Gypsy clocked in at nearly 5.5 minutes. However, it was whittled down to 4 minutes and 24 seconds for the album, and then 3 minutes and 53 seconds for the single. But the shortened length seems to have paid off commercially. Gypsy reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 13 on the Cashbox chart, number 9 on the AC charts, and it went to number 4 on the rock chart, making it a triple threat across the board. Now, internationally, Gypsy went to number 46 in the UK, number 35 in West Germany, number 25 in Ireland, 17 in Australia, 16 in Canada, and went to number 6 in the Dutch Top 40. The music video for the song, directed by the great Russell Mulcahy, called for the biggest budget of any music video at the time. It also became MTV's first world premiere video. Not surprisingly, interpersonal strife amongst the band members complicated things on set dramatically. The director remembers people pulling him aside saying something to the effect, no. You can't have those two together because they used to see each other, but now they've split up. Now he's with her. It was all very confusing for Russell Mulcahy. Now, as you can imagine, the experience, it wasn't exactly a happy memory for Stevie. She had to work closely with, even dance romantically with her former boyfriend, Lindsey Buckingham. Said Stevie about it, "We weren't getting along well then. I didn't want to be anywhere near him. I certainly didn't want to be in his arms." According to Stevie Nicks, if you look closely, you can see the displeasure all over her face. Surprisingly, Gypsy is almost non-existent in pop culture media. There's a solitary placement in the Netflix series Glow. Likewise, covers of the track are also sparse. It's just such a great Fleetwood Mac tune. Outside solo performances by Stevie solo herself, I couldn't find any noteworthy cover versions, actually. Regardless, between Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, Gypsy has been performed over 700 times in their concerts, so it's not like the band has forgotten about it. Plus, it's been streamed an amazing 450 million times, so in terms of pop culture, it really is something of a hidden gem here. Surprisingly, Gypsy was absent from 1997's The Dance, at least on the album version. You can catch it on the 22-track Laserdisc DVD release. Now, reflecting on the legacy of Gypsy, Stevie's touch-and-go partner Lindsey Buckingham had this to say about it. "I think Gypsy was one of my best collaborations ever with Stevie. Not that I co-wrote it with her, but in terms of what I do for Stevie as far as arrangement and things go, I think that is one of the most effective pieces that we've ever done." And he's absolutely right. I love the last 90 seconds of Gypsy. I mean, you can just feel Stevie's absolute pain and heartache, especially on the line, "I can still see your bright eyes." It's an incredible vocal. The harmonies are breathtaking, and I love Lindsey's maybe once, maybe twice part. His guitar work to close out the song, it's just fierce. It's one of the best endings to a Mac song in their catalog. This song takes me right back to the early 80s, as a child just discovering the wonder of music. Now, my mom and dad were big Mac fans. They bought every new record that they put out, so I was very lucky to hear their music front to back with every new release that they bring home. My parents even bought their solo albums. I'm just now starting to realize how cool my mom and dad were. I mean, they brought home all of the great records and they raised me on the right music. And I got to tell you, this made all the difference. So the week that Gypsy reached number 12 on the Hot 100, there were some strong contenders climbing the chart all over. There was Jackson Browne, there was America, Olivia Newton-John, the Steve Miller Band. There was Survivor, Kenny Loggins, Steve Perry, Glenn Frey. Man, those were the days. As far as the top 5 from that same week, coming in at number 5 was Joe Cocker and Jennifer Warnes with Up Where We Belong. At number 4, I Keep Forgetting Every Time You're Near, parentheses song by Michael McDonald. I keep forgetting we're not in love anymore. Number 3, the Alan Parsons Project with Eye in the Sky. And number 2, Who Can It Be Now by Men at Work. at number 1, John Mellencamp had Jack and Diane. I mean, that's a phenomenal top 5.
Little ditty about Jack and Diane.
It was so strong back then that this perfect Fleetwood Mac ditty didn't even make the top 10. And many people would be surprised to know that the Mac only had one number 1 song. It was Dreams. I talk about the charts a lot. They're fun. I grew up listening to Casey Kasem every week. I was rooting for my favorites to top the charts, willing them to the number 1 spot. I mean, it was a lot of fun. But all these years later, it's so clear to me that most of Fleetwood Mac's most hallowed songs, though never number 1 hits, they've lasted longer than most of the biggest number 1 hits of their times. Fleetwood Mac, they're a timeless band with an undeniable magic that is now the stuff of rock folklore. And Gypsy, it's a prime example of this. It's a song that when listened to on a great pair of headphones, just transports you to a mystical world, a world that exceeds time and space. And that's so much more important than a chart position. Hey, leave us a comment about this Fleetwood Mac song, Gypsy. What are your memories of the song? What are your thoughts about Fleetwood Mac at this time during Mirage? One of your favorite albums? Let's have a great discussion below. Is it one of the best hidden gems out there? I think it is. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our daily channel. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth.